Ultra short throws are my absolute favorite kind of projector, and in this video I've got 8 new USTs from Hisense, Nexago, Epson, XGME, JMGo, and WeMax, and we're going to test their brightness, contrast, and color accuracy. Then we'll put them head to head on 100-inch screens. For gamers, we'll test their input lag. Then we'll look at their 24p motion handling, 3D performance, and a whole lot more. And as always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel. The least expensive projector in the video is the just released $1799 WeMax Nova Pro, which is a single laser UST with an advertised 2100 ISO lumens, and I actually measured slightly more than that at 2234 when set to its office brightness mode, which does disable its white balance controls, but it still produces a very watchable image. After that, for $2697 is the Hisense PT1, which is marketed as a more budget-friendly version of the popular PX3 Pro, which has the same triple laser light source but less brightness with an advertised 2500 ANSI lumens, but I was only able to measure 2221 ANSI lumens using its brightness enhancer level 3, which is heavily green shifted and warns that extended use could decrease the lifespan of the projector. And without the brightness enhancer, I was only able to measure 1698 ANSI lumens, which is considerably lower than advertised. Then for $2 more than that, at $2699, we've got the new XGME Aura 2 GTV that, as the name implies, now includes a full Google TV operating system. And the Aura 2 is advertised at 2300 ISO lumens, and I was able to measure considerably higher than that at 2692 lumens in high performance mode with the fans on jet engine speeds and a green shifted image. But on standard mode, it came in almost exactly as advertised at 2284 lumens. Next, for $2799 is the just released JMGo O2S Ultra, which I first saw at CES 2025, and the JMGo is using a triple laser light source to put out an advertised 3600 ISO lumens, and again, I was able to measure considerably higher than that at 4081 lumens on dynamic mode with full speed fans and terrible color accuracy, but unfortunately in its more color accurate modes, it drops down all the way to 2454 lumens, which is still the brightest so far, but not close to 3600. After that, for $2997 is the winner from last year's video, the Hisense PX3 Pro, which is a triple laser projector with an advertised 3000 lumens, and the PX3 Pro actually significantly outperformed that at 3475 measured lumens on brightness enhancer high, which again has unusable color accuracy, but it also measured around 2900 lumens in standard mode, taking the first place spot for the JMGo for the most usable lumens so far. Then for $2999, we've got the Nexago Aurora Pro Mark II, which I technically already reviewed in May, but it got a very significant firmware update in July that has completely transformed the performance of both the ALPD light source and the dynamic iris. The Mark II has an advertised brightness of 2400 lumens, and I measured 2302 in its brightest mode, which is still very usable, and around 1900 in its more color accurate modes. After that, jumping up significantly in price to $4099 is the new Epson QS100B, which is the upgraded version of the popular LS800, which loses any built-in speakers or operating system, but does have more color calibration options and 500 extra lumens, coming in at 4500 lumens total. And like most other Epsons that I've tested, the QS100B came in significantly over its advertised lumens in dynamic mode, where it measured an eye-searing 6241 lumens with usable color accuracy, but changing the settings does cause the brightness to drop off quickly, with other color modes coming in between 3600 and 4200 lumens. And last, for an eye-watering $5,997, we've got the brand new Hisense L9Q, a huge triple laser projector coming in with an advertised 5000 lumens. But I was only able to measure a maximum of 4870 lumens with its brightness enhancer on Ultra, which again warns against prolonged use and is heavily green shifted. And the Hisense L9Q measured just 3716 lumens on standard mode without the brightness enhancer, which still puts it in second place overall for both total and usable brightness, but is disappointing nonetheless given the 5000 lumen claim, especially since the PX3 Pro is able to get so close to its advertised brightness without using the brightness enhancer. I also measured the contrast of each projector by taking a center point brightness measurement on a full white screen and then comparing it to the center point brightness on this black screen with a moving gray box. And starting out with native contrast, which means no laser dimming, the Aurora Pro Mark II came out on top with a native contrast of 3754 to 1, with the Hisense PT1 and PX3 Pro in second and third, while the much more expensive Hisense L9Q was significantly lower than that at 1986 to 1 native contrast. And next we'll look at their dynamic contrast, which uses laser laser dimming and also dynamic iris in the Nexgo's case, and the surprise top performer here was the Hisense PT1, which came in with a massive 13,364 to 1 dynamic contrast, followed by the Epson QS100B, which registered at 12,747 to 1, and the Nexgo came in third with 11,009 to 1 set to iris light and scene adapt engine high. But as I've mentioned many times, dynamic contrast measurements are not super useful on their own because it all depends on how it translates into actual content. So next, it's time to put the projectors side by side on identical 100-inch Fresnel ALR screens. And going from the least expensive to the most, we've got the WiMAX Nova Pro on the left and the Hisense PT1 on the right. And I did calibrate all these projectors to a grayscale DE under 2 and a color DE under 4. So there shouldn't be any major color differences, mostly just contrast, tone mapping, and sharpness. And you can see that in these bright scenes, both projectors look pretty great, with the WiMAX being noticeably brighter, but the Hisense was both sharper and more dramatic, especially in Danny's hair, which had much more depth on the PT1. But switching over to a darker scene, the PT1's dynamic laser dimming kicks in and it was able to keep the highlights at the same brightness as the WiMAX, but significantly lowered the black floor, resulting in very convincing shadows compared to the muddy blacks on the WiMAX. And looking at HDR content, the differences were massive, with the WiMAX only supporting HDR10, while the PT1 supports Dolby Vision. And one other trick I like to do here is use auto exposure on my camera during the scene from Obi-Wan to help visualize the black levels, and for darkroom viewing, there was just no question that the PT1 won this round. So in round 2, the XGME Aura 2 is on the left and the Hisense PT1 is on the right. And just like in round 1, you can see that the Aura 2 is brighter than the PT1, but the higher contrast on the PT1 makes it look much more dramatic. But again, in bright scenes, I would mostly just call this a toss-up. However, in a dark room, in dark scenes, the XGME's 1800 to 1 contrast with no dynamic dimming just didn't stand a chance against the PT1's over 13,000 to 1 dynamic contrast. And not only was the black floor significantly lower, but the extra dynamic range also made shadow detail much more clear on the Hisense. And again, looking at the auto exposure test during Obi-Wan, the Hisense PT1 easily took this round also. Round 3 then has the JMGO O2S Ultra on the left and the Hisense PT1 on the right, and the O2S Ultra is almost twice as bright as the PT1 after calibration, so this was right on the edge of what my camera could properly expose. But in person, the O2S Ultra looked awesome in these bright scenes. But I didn't even need to get to the darkest scenes before the wheels just fell off. And in this moderately lit scene, the JMGO went absolutely crazy, blowing out the highlights and crushing shadow detail. And I was eventually able to trace it to a setting called local contrast control that needs to be turned off, but is turned on by default. However, the next problem came in dark scenes, where the black floor of the JMGO turned extremely blue, which is typically an issue that's associated with laser dimming. But I couldn't see any kind of laser dimming or dynamic contrast settings, so it must just be a default behavior at low luminance levels. So even though I've got high hopes for the O2S for lights on viewing, darkroom viewing just doesn't seem to be its strong suit, and the PT1 easily moved on again. So in round 4, the defending champion, the Hisense PX3 Pro, is on the left, and its little brother, the PT1, is on the right. And again, there is a staggering difference in brightness of about 1200 post-calibrated lumens between the PX3 Pro and the PT1. And in bright scenes, it was difficult to show that entire dynamic range with my camera. But even in person, where I tend to favor brighter projectors in bright scenes, there was just something about the PT1's image that kept drawing my eye. And I know I keep saying it, but the best word that I have to describe it is dramatic. In moderately lit scenes, both projectors looked great, but the dynamic contrast setting on the PX3 Pro only works at max laser power, so while the highlights ended up brighter, the black floor was raised more than you would typically want for pure darkroom viewing. And the same held true for the darkest scenes, where honestly both projectors looked great, but the PT1 just had a slight edge in terms of black floor and overall contrast. And I picked the PT1 to win this round, not only because I think it earned it, but also because of what it has to face off against next. On the left in round 5 is the Nexgo Aurora Pro Mark II, and the Hisense PT1 is still on the right. And in addition to the most aggressive laser dimming on the market, the Mark II also has a motorized dynamic iris that opens and closes as the lighting changes in the scene, which when done correctly is the holy grail of dynamic contrast systems. And you can see that in bright scenes, the Mark II is considerably brighter than the PT1, but still maintains that same level of drama in Danny's hair, especially on the left side of her face. But when the overall luminance of the scene shifts, the Nexgo is able to quickly clamp down its iris to increase the contrast while maintaining bright highlights. And if you focus on the truck in the background here, you can see that the PT1 is still able to achieve slightly better black levels, but the highlights on Henry's shirt and face give the image a lot more more depth on the Nexego. And in the darkest scenes, these two projectors were ridiculously evenly matched. And while I thought the Nexego looked slightly better in person, the dynamic iris artifacts are definitely visible when you're critically watching and looking for them. And I think I probably spent more time than I ever have trying to decide the winner of this round, and I ultimately decided to leave it in the hands of one of the most iconic dark scene torture tests, the 1917 staircase scene. And at first you can see that the PT1 was all over it, not only showing more detail in the black wall, but also hitting the window highlight much harder. But as the corporal rounds that corner, the Nexego recovers and comes back with an even brighter highlight. And in the black floor battle, the Nexego just barely comes out on top, but then manages significantly brighter highlights while maintaining that same low black level. And I'm going to give this round to the Nexego, but I do want to say that I am beyond impressed by the PT1. So next, in round 6, the Nexego Aurora Pro Mark II is on the left and the Epson QS100B is on the right. And after calibration, the Epson maintained 4,228 lumens, but despite the main selling point of this projector being its ability to be calibrated, I could not get it to behave in dynamic mode. And the best I could do was an average grayscale error of 4.2 and an average color error of 4.5. And I'm pretty confident that I could have gotten natural mode or cinema mode closer, but Epson limits its most aggressive dimming and full fade to black to dynamic mode, so I wanted to use that to give it the best chance. However, in bright scenes it looked comparatively terrible with bad colors and poor interesting contrast. And dark scenes on the Epson were an absolute joke, which just goes to show that you can't trust dynamic contrast measurements since the Epson measured almost 13,000 to 1, but it can't get anywhere close to that in practice. And just for fun, here's what that looks like with the camera set to auto, and as you can see, the Epson QS100B is definitely not meant for a dark room, so the Nexego moves on again. And that makes the final round the Nexego Aurora Pro Mark II on the left and the flagship Hisense L9Q on the right. And unlike the Epson from the previous round, the extremely bright L9Q actually looked better to me in bright scenes, and the camera had a hard time capturing both projectors properly given their 1300 lumen difference. But the camera could easily capture the difference in contrast ratio, and these dark scenes were almost exactly what I saw in person, with the significantly lower dynamic contrast of the L9Q unable to keep up with the Nexego. And one of the most surprising things to me was how much brighter the highlights on the Nexego looked compared to the L9Q in the darkest scenes. And the Nexego also does an excellent job maintaining the neutral color of its black floor, while the L9Q was a little bit blue shifted. And ultimately this round easily went to the Nexego, which makes these the final rankings for darkroom viewing, with the Nexego Aurora Pro Mark II in first, the Hisense PT1 in a very close second, last year's winner the PX3 Pro coming in third, and the inexpensive WeMax Nova Pro in fourth. But one of the main selling points of an ultra short throw projector is their ability to use ambient light rejecting or ALR screens to act as TV replacements that you can use even with some lights on. So next I turned on the lights and started over with the WeMax Nova Pro on the left and the Hisense PT1 on the right. And there was no question that the 500 extra lumens on the WeMax made it more suitable for bright room viewing, and any contrast and black floor advantages that the PT1 had were completely negated by the ambient light in the room, so the WeMax easily moved on. Then in round 2, the WeMax Nova Pro was on the left and the XGME Aura 2 was on the right, and this was a little tricky to show on camera since these Fresnel screens will tend to be brighter in the middle of the image and dimmer on the outsides when filmed, so it looks like there is a significant difference in the brightness and contrast of the scoreboard, but you can see that it's the opposite when the graphics show up on the other side of the screen. And ultimately in this round I preferred the color brightness of the XGME, so it's going to move on to round 3. So in round 3, the JM Go O2S Ultra is on the left and the XGME Aura 2 is on the right. And the JM Go looked excellent here, with 800 more lumens than the XGME, which really helped it punch through the overhead ambient light. And I also thought that the focus in the scoreboard was especially good, which made this an easy win for the JM Go. Round 4 then put the JM Go O2S Ultra on the left and the Hisense PX3 Pro on the right. And despite only having a little over 200 more lumens than the PX3 Pro, the image on the JM Go looked quite a bit brighter, while the PX3 Pro looked more vivid and saturated. And this round was close enough that I decided to evaluate them with just a small lamp on in the background. And ultimately I thought that the picture on the JM Go was a little bit more crisp, which earned it a win in this round. Round 5 was then the JM Go O2S Ultra on the left and the Nexego Aurora Pro Mark II on the right. And this round wasn't super close, with the pure RGB lasers of the JM Go providing significantly more color pop, and I even tried to bump the Nexego into its brightest mode to give it a better chance, but it was still no contest, and the JM Go easily took this round also. So round 6 was the JM Go O2S Ultra on the left and the Epson QS100B on the right, and this is basically what the Epson is built for. The Epson doesn't have the sharpest picture with only half of 4K resolution, and the colors aren't the most accurate, But if you just want bright, the Epson is the way to go. And even though it does look great on camera here, I wasn't super impressed with the Epson in person with my color accurate settings, so I decided to just reset the dynamic mode to default. And again, this is not color accurate or particularly crisp, but you could shine headlights at this screen and still comfortably watch your favorite sports on the Epson, so it easily won this round. And that means that the last round is the Hisense L9Q on the left and the Epson QS100B on the right. And I even turned on the brightness enhancer on the L9Q to try to give it a fighting chance against the Epson, but on dynamic there is a nearly 2,000 lumen difference between these two high-end projectors. And while the focus, sharpness, and color on the L9Q was clearly superior, I bet that most people would choose the Epson 9 times out of 10, making these the final ranks for bright room viewing. And if you are looking for a multi-use projector for both bright and dark rooms, the Aurora Pro Mark II and Hisense PX3 Pro all ended up with an average rank of 3.5, so you'll need to decide how important each viewing type is for you. But there is still so much more to cover, and for gamers, we are going to start with input lag, which is the time in between pressing a button on your controller and seeing that action on screen. And in general, input lag numbers under 20 milliseconds are excellent for gaming. Between 20 and 50 milliseconds is good for casual gaming. 50 to 100 milliseconds starts to feel a little bit strange, and input lag numbers over 100 milliseconds will not work for playing video games. And we'll start out with the input lag at 60 Hz, 120 Hz, and 240 Hz. And you can see that at 4K 60, the majority of the projectors were under 20 milliseconds. At 120 Hz, all the projectors improved except for the WiMAX Nova and Epson QS100B, which both showed dropped frames at 120 Hz. And at 240 Hz, the 3 Hisense projectors and the XGIMI Aura 2 all had under 5 milliseconds of input lag, while the WiMAX dropped frames again and the Epson doesn't support 240 Hz at all. I also did one additional measurement at 4K 60 while using digital keystone, and all the projectors except for the WiMAX maintained under 50 milliseconds of input lag, which is an excellent result compared to just 2 years ago when you basically couldn't use keystone when playing video games at all. Next, I tested each projector's ability to play back cinematic 24p content without motion jitter, and using the ratings 24p test, the Hisense L9Q, Hisense PT1, Nextgo Aurora Pro Mark II, and Epson QS100B all passed the 24p test, but in actual content without MEMC enabled, the stuttering on the Epson was horrible and probably not something that anyone would actually consider using. The JMGO and XGIMI can both play back 24p by enabling their projector superframe option, but that does limit the output to 1080p, and the Hisense PX3 Pro and WiMAX Nova always display 24p at 60 Hz using 3.2 pull down. DLP projectors are also the last remaining way to consume 3D content outside of a VR headset, and I evaluated each projector's 3D performance using the frame-packed Blu-ray of A Turtle's Tale, which has some of the most intense 3D pop-out effects of any 3D title available. And I rated each projector for eye comfort and 3D effect. And just like the previous version of the XGIMI Aura 2 that I reviewed, it just seems like it's in a completely different league than other projectors in terms of 3D. And while I normally feel like my brain needs a good amount of convincing to watch 3D, the XGIMI just feels natural with both a strong 3D effect and high eye comfort. The Nextgo Aurora Pro Mark II was the next best with good eye comfort and strong 3D effect, and it has been significantly improved since the last time I reviewed it, and it no longer clips highlights during 3D content. And while it wasn't particularly enjoyable for me, I do need to recognize that the 3D on the Hisense L9Q was intense. And even though I personally felt it pretty uncomfortable on my eyes, it was definitely the strongest 3D effect that I've ever experienced. So if you are a seasoned 3D enthusiast that usually doesn't experience eye discomfort, I would strongly suggest finding somewhere to experience the L9Q. As far as 3D compatibility, I think that JMGO definitely intends to support frame packing, but only side-by-side and top and bottom formats were working when I tested it, and neither the WiMAX nor the Epson supports 3D at all. Next, evaluating their focus and clarity, I lined up each projector perfectly with my 100-inch screen without using keystone, and I projected this test image, and then I took close-up pictures of the middle and each corner of the screen, and then graded each projector from 0 to 2 for each screen segment, with 0 being unacceptable focus and 2 being excellent. And the top performers were the Hisense PX3 Pro and L9Q, which both had perfect scores, and the worst performer was the Epson QS100B, which not only had relatively poor corner focus, but is also half the resolution of the other projectors, since it only does 2 pixel shifts instead of 4. And that caused it to look a bit soft, especially in the crosses on the letter F and in all of the smallest text line. But Epson's projection system definitely has some clear advantages, specifically that it uses a 3 LCD projection technology that splits the image up into red, green, and blue subframes, and then projects them through 3 monochrome LCD panels at the same time, resulting in a true composite image on the screen. While single chip DLP projectors like the ones in this video project each color sequentially and rely on persistence of vision to combine all the colors together. And unfortunately, this method can sometimes lead to the DLP Rainbow Effect, where fast-moving, high-contrast objects can look like they have a rainbow outline. And in general, this rainbow effect is reduced by increasing the speed at which the colors are cycled. So to test this, I bought a high-speed camera that is capable of recording at 40,000 frames per second, which lets me determine the number of color flashes per frame. And going by this method, the lowest rainbow effect should be from the Hisense PX3 Pro and L9Q, which both have 20 color flashes per frame. The Nexago Aurora Pro Mark II and JMGO O2S Ultra have 16 flashes per frame, and the rest of the projectors use what's typically called a 4x color wheel with 12 flashes per frame. And using that traditional 4x color wheel can help increase native contrast, but it does cause more RBE. But you should be aware that the overall sensitivity to RBE will vary significantly from person to person. And another individual sensitivity that can differ from person to person has to do with the light source of the projector. And all of these projectors use lasers in one form or another to generate their image, but they can generally be divided into 4 different categories. The 3 Hisense projectors and the JMGO are pure RGB projectors that use individual red, green, and blue lasers to generate their colors, which gives them the best color space coverage, but it also makes them more prone to laser speckle, which can look like a grainy interference pattern on the screen. And in my testing, it seemed like the PX3 Pro had a slightly higher laser speckle than the rest, and on the others, I noticed what looked like a side-to-side vibration of the speckle, which may be a method to help reduce laser speckle. And as I mentioned, pure RGB lasers have the best color space coverage, but since their spectral distribution is so narrow, people with even mild color blindness can have trouble seeing the full power of the lasers, resulting in an image that could look too green or too red depending on the type of color deficiency. The XGME Aura 2 is a dual laser projector that uses blue and red lasers combined with a phosphor for green, which you would expect to have high laser speckle, but for the most part I found the speckle on the Aura 2 to be extremely low, especially in SDR content with the optical color filter engaged, since almost all SDR colors have at least a little bit of green mixed in to reduce their intensity. But like the triple laser projectors, the narrow red primary of the XGME can be difficult for people that have pro-tan color blindness to fully perceive, which can cause the image to look too green. The Nexago Aurora Pro Mark II is another hybrid light source that has a pure laser for each primary color, and then additional phosphors for both green and red. And like the XGME, the Nexago speckle is extremely low, but since it has pure lasers for each of its primaries, it has a slightly higher color space coverage than the XGME, and the wider distribution of wavelengths around the red and green lasers also eliminates the color blindness issue. And last, the WiMAX and Epson are single laser projectors that use one pure blue laser, and then green and red are created using a phosphor color wheel. And as a result, laser speckle tends to be the lowest on single laser projectors, but can still show up on pure blue screens when using the widest color spaces, since they won't have any other colors mixed in. And while there are rare instances of people with blue color blindness, neither protan nor deutan, which are the 2 major types of deficiencies, will have any issues perceiving the color on a single laser projector. And last, looking at the physical differences in these projectors, the Hisense L9Q and Epson QS100B are absolutely massive. The XGME Aura 2, Hisense PX3 Pro and PT1, and Nexago Aurora Pro Mark II are medium-sized but should still fit on most entertainment consoles, and the WiMAX and JMGO are tiny in comparison. The throw distances are also very different for each projector, and after lining each projector up with a 100-inch fixed frame screen, I measured the distance from the back of the projector to the front of the screen, and from the bottom of the projector to the bottom of the screen. And you can see that the JMGO has the shortest throw, followed by the Epson and then the L9Q, and the Hisense PT1 and PX3 Pro have the longest throws. But while a shorter throw may seem advantageous for furniture placement, be aware that projectors with very short throws are generally more difficult to get perfectly lined up with the screen, and imperfections in the projection surface will be more exaggerated, which makes this next part even crazier. And that's that I think JMGO intends the O2S Ultra to be mostly used in temporary setups, with its small size, short throw, and it even comes with a foam carrying case. And I admit to being very skeptical of this idea, since USTs generally need perfectly tensioned screens to avoid distortion. But both the JMGO and XGME have automatic screen fit and a distortion reduction tool that uses your phone's camera. And I went in with very low expectations and was blown away by the results. And you can see that even on this non-tension screen, which would normally have no chance of working with a UST, the waves are almost completely eliminated and the overall picture quality is excellent. And because these new features make ultra short throws a viable option in temporary setups, now it actually makes sense to evaluate their built-in speakers. And using the same clip from Star Wars Rise of Skywalker on each projector, the XGME Aura 2 and Hisense PT1 were the loudest, and the XGME Aura 2, Hisense L9Q, and JMGO O2S had the best bass response, but I do wish that the JMGO was a little bit louder.
Claude, I hope you fixed that surge.
Yeah.
Claude, I hope you fixed that surge. Claude, I hope you fixed that surge.
And last, I also measured the fan noise of each projector, and here they are from quietest to loudest. This projector is unplugged, and this is what a whisper sounds like in this room. So it's conclusion time. All things considered, which ultra short throw projector is the best in 2025? For primarily darkroom viewing, I am going to declare a tie between the Nexago Aurora Pro Mark II and the Hisense PT1, and both of them are absolutely exceptional, with the Nexago coming out slightly on top in terms of black floor, and the PT1 slightly in the lead in terms of color accuracy after calibration and color space coverage. The PT1 did have better input lag, but only if you're planning on using it at 240 Hz, and the Nexago has the advantage of being able to crank out about 400 extra lumens after calibration. But if you are really trying to decide between the two, I would say that the main difference is that the Nexago has a higher tendency to show dynamic artifacts as a result of its mechanical iris. So if those types of things are going to bother you, then the PT1 is probably a better pick. But the PT1's pure RGB laser light source is more prone to laser speckle and color deficient metamerism, so if you are planning on using a Fresnel ALR screen or you have any form of color blindness, then the Nexago should be the clear choice. And one other interesting thing that might be worth considering is that on full brightness, the Nexago pulls over 290 watts, which is the highest of any projector in the video, while the PT1 in comparison uses just 122 watts, which is the lowest in the video. For a mixed-use projector for watching football during the day with the lights on and movies at night in a dark room, the Hisense PX3 Pro is just extremely well-rounded, with 3,000 usable lumens, high native contrast, and effective laser dimming. And it's not going to have the same black floor as the Aurora Pro Mark II or the Hisense PT1, but it's generally just good at everything. However, like the PT1, its RGB light source is prone to laser speckle, so you should choose a lenticular screen over a Fresnel, and if you or anyone else in your family has color blindness, there will unfortunately be some white balance issues. For a bright room projector for watching sports, the two top performers were the $5,000 Epson QS100B and the $6,000 Hisense L9Q. And in their current state, at their current price, I don't think that you should buy either of them. The QS100B measured 6,200 lumens on dynamic mode, which is only about 1,000 more than the Epson LS650, which is currently selling for $1,500 and also includes built-in Android TV and integrated speakers. And both of the projectors have virtually the same picture quality with 1/2 4K resolution. And honestly, there is just nothing about the QS100B that justifies a 330% price increase over the LS650. Moral of the story, if you are just looking for something bright, there's really no reason to spend $5,000 or more, and you're better off with the Epson LS650 or the Hisense PX3 Pro. And in a completely new category that I never expected this year, the JMGO O2S Ultra is the first viable portable ultra short throw projector that I've ever seen. It's small, it's got a super short throw ratio, and mind-blowingly cool automatic setup features that make it possible to project onto a non-tension screen or a white wall with minimal to no distortions. The O2S Ultra was also the third brightest projector after calibration, with respectable native contrast and low input lag. And I'm guessing the FramePack 3D compatibility is just a bug that can be easily fixed in firmware. The XGIMI Aura 2 has the same auto fit and dewarping features, and it actually has louder speakers than the JMGO, but compared to the JMGO, it doesn't stand out as an overly portable projector. And from a picture quality standpoint, the only place that it really excelled was in 3D content, where it remains at the top of my 3D performance list, rivaled only by the XGIMI Horizon Ultra. And last, the WiMAX Nova Pro, which for $1799 actually performed pretty well, finishing 4th in darkroom viewing with a 3001 native contrast, bright single laser light source that's not likely to produce laser speckle or metamerism. But there is one big problem, and that's that the WiMAX Nova Pro and 4Movie Cinema Edge that I selected last year as my overall budget pick are the same projector. Except that the 4Movie Edge got a firmware update last December that added FramePack 3D compatibility, and the WiMAX doesn't have that update. And I will update with a pinned comment if WiMAX is able to push that same firmware to the Nova Pro, but right now with both projectors priced equally, the software on the 4Movie Cinema Edge makes it the clear pick over the WiMAX Nova Pro. As always, there are no sponsored reviews on this channel, but I do have links down in the description for all the projectors in this video, and as always, I appreciate when you use those links, since as an Amazon affiliate, I do earn a small commission on the sale at no cost to you. I'd also like to thank all of my awesome patrons over at Patreon for their continued support, and if you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and as always, thanks for watching The Hookup.